For all those of you who have stuck it out here, I want to thank Ginny for inviting me to moderate this panel. And when she asked me to do it, I said, I'll do it on one condition, and that's that you give me the time slot that is at the peak of the turkey pesto sleep inducement happening. So I know the tryptophan's working on everyone, but I hope that you're ready for a great panel here. We've got a wonderful group to talk about this issue of analytics, and it's come up a lot today. People saying how we've got this great opportunity now to use analytics to improve education. And the truth is, as more and more people are consuming education and engaging in educational experiences digitally, we do get so much more data and data points that you can do analytics on. On the other hand, and I'll come at this from a little bit of a cynical perspective, it's a lot of talk still. And so we've got a great panel, two folks from the digital publishing and creation of digital learning experiences world, and then two folks from the school side, from the institutional side, who can illuminate us on what's real, what should we believe about analytics, what hasn't happened but could happen, and how are we going to get there. So I'll very quickly introduce folks. We've got the two folks from the digital publishing world, Jim Ambach from CourseSmart. He's the SVP for product management, and they've just announced a new analytics platform, so very good timing here. And Babur Habib, who co-founded Know and serves as its CTO, and they're also have been launching analytics platforms off of their digital experiences. From the institutional side, we've got Mark Sarver, who's the CEO of eduKan, and they're a consortium of colleges and universities that's delivering online education. And Mike Sharkey is the director of analytics for the University of Phoenix, and is, if anyone's in danger of being working with big data, that would be Mike. So I'm a partner with the Parthenon Group. We're a management consulting firm. Work across the globe, across a variety of verticals, but education is our largest practice area, both on the public sector side and in the private sector. And we've worked with a lot of higher education institutions to bring analytics to help them improve their performance. So let me start with the group here. We hear all this hype. It's analytics are going to change how we're doing the business. Why should we care about it? What's the promise? What can this actually change going forward? Mike?
I think a lot of things have already been said today. I mean, just from the previous session of, to me, everything goes back to student success. So at the previous session, they talked about intervention, and Andrew mentioned intervention at the point of potential failure, their success within that course. We talked about matching outcomes to careers. Right, so their success as far as long-term with the students. All of those things are data. So to me, the broadest way to say it is student success, and there are many, many ways to do it. The challenge is focusing and doing the right thing the right way.
I think, one of the things we have to understand is that in education, we've always collected data, right? So when it comes to homework problems, how they're graded, quizzes, midterms, finals, GPAs, what you do in K-12, higher ed, we're always collecting data. So, this is not something new that, somehow data analytics is just springing up in the education field. The problem is that things like grades or things like GPAs, in my opinion, they're a lagging indicator of student performance. By the time you get your grade or by the time your GPA develops, it's already too late. How do you actually correct it? How do you remediate it? It's already too late. And I think now we're at the cusp of bringing data in such a way that it becomes a leading indicator of how students are studying, what they're learning, what they're not learning, right? So for instance, the platform that we've just introduced, which is analytics for the student, it's to make the student understand how they're doing in almost virtual real time, right? So it becomes actionable in the sense that it's real now and here. And you can improve, you can make decisions based on that data on how you can make your learning more efficient?
I think probably two of the big areas are in student learning. Analytics, when employed correctly in the future of technology, analytics will truly be able to change the way students learn. We'll talk a little bit about that. And also think it brings accountability. It brings accountability to the faculty, it brings accountability to the staff, it brings accountability to the administrators, and ultimately to the board. I mean, right now, you go to a board meeting and your governing board gets a set of financials, and your set of financials come from massive amounts of data, but they break it down usually into a profit and loss, a balance sheet, statement of cash flows, which confuses all of them. But when it comes to analytics, when it comes to assessment, and I think that's a huge area where analytics is going to play in, these governing boards get a 300-page report where the assessment group has done this assessment, there's ends, there's statistical values, there's standard deviations, and the board just glazes over. And so the ability to use some visual analytics to show the board, just like we do with financials, here's where the institution is in terms of what we define as quality.
Yeah. So there's one issue of capturing the data and analyzing it. There's another of it being able to communicate it in a way that it becomes actionable, the way you're talking about, Babur.
Yep.
Yeah.
Other perspectives, Jim?
Well, I just think that, if there's anything that everyone in this room shares, it's that we have an imperative to both improve the quality and reduce the cost of education. Making this data available for a number of different players within that value chain can achieve both of those things. So you mentioned that we just launched, we're about to begin a beta of our CourseSmart analytics with 9 different institutions. And what we're finding is that at an institutional level, they can use that data to determine what exactly is the most effective material and what's not so effective material, so reduce costs that way, make sure that they're spending money on the right things. Instructors can use that data to determine, as Babur points out, more predictive who's going to have problems maybe because they're not as engaged in the material as they should be. And then finally, on the publisher side, that data is awfully useful for them because they're able to determine, again, what's effective, what's not, where are people spending their time. Now that we're delivering all this material digitally, that data is available, and I think it's time to make it useful.
Well, I want to come back to how we make it useful and how often people are making it useful today. Let me stop and say, how do we make this tangible? Can you give a really specific example of a place where using data analytics in a higher education context has measurably changed the outcomes or the quality or the experience or the cost?
Sure. I'll give an example because it's a project I've been working on directly. So it's what I enjoy doing because it's tactical. I attend Learning Analytics and Knowledge Conference, and I love it, but a lot of things are research-oriented and not tangible outcomes, and especially the hype that's been going on in the last year, there is definitely a shortage of those kinds of projects. So the charge I took on, we're an open access institution, so I wish we had 99% retention rate like other institutions had where you've got an admissions process. We don't, so retention's a big issue for us. So saying, oh, use analytics to help retention is way too broad. If that's where the problem you're trying to solve, you're going to lose. You really have to narrow it down like a hypothesis and research question to what is it you're trying to do. So looking at the data that I know we have, in my mind, our students attend course week to week. So weekly attendance is very closely tied to retention. If you stop attending class, that's a good sign that you may drop out for good. So looked at the data we had, and we built a model, and the model predicts whether you will attend class next week or not. So we look at a number of data points, about 30 data points, maybe half or so of them actually are significant. Things like, what is your grade so far to date in class? Did you hand in your homework this week? How much did you participate this week in relation to everybody else? We run a model on it. A week goes from Monday through Sunday at midnight. You hand your homework in. Sunday night, it's due. 5 a.m. on Monday, we run the model. It spits out a risk score. What is the probability that you will not attend next week? And if students are of a certain threshold, we take that information, and we have academic counselors counselors that have 200 to 300 students on their roster, and the counselors are there not even as much about, hey, what course do you take next, but more about life coach, how's it going, can I help? Monday morning, 5 a.m., we run the process. The alerts go in front of the counselors, and they call the students. So we don't know what the root cause is. It could be personal. My kid is sick. I'm traveling with work. It could be academic. It could be financial. We just know there are symptoms of distress, and then the counselors call them up and work on it. We've been doing it for 12 weeks now. We did a test and control group, so we got 2 groups controlled for as many variables as possible. And in the last 12 weeks, we've seen that the group that is getting these triggers has about 100 basis points, 1 percentage point greater attendance ratio than the other group.
Within 12 weeks.
Within the first 12 weeks starting.
So that sounds really valuable.
Yep.
It's actionable. It, at some level, doesn't sound like an enormously challenging, not to diminish the analytics, but at some level, even without the 30 data points, if you just paid attention to attendance, could you do? And so this is where my skepticism about analytics and big data comes in, which is, we've had lots of data for a long time. I think someone earlier mentioned there's data all over the place of education. Why is it that what you're doing is the exception? And whether it's in higher ed, whether it's in K-12, you go in and you say, look, you've had this attendance data for years and years. It's just not being acted on. Why is that happening, and how do you change that?
Let me show you a couple of things, and maybe it'll tie into that. If we can switch over. 2 things. One on our.
Can we switch over to that one slide? Yeah.
2 things. We had a project that we called Project Aristotle, which was our goal to go digitally embedded content. And we had this grand goal of using all OER, and our faculty would create it. They would use others. We would stand by and sing Kumbaya. Isn't it great that we're saving these students all this money? The reality is a faculty member has limited amount of time to go out and find the data, the perfect examples, the perfect resources. And so we actually partnered with Pearson, which I'll talk about in a second. Here's one of the things that we started using. This is what we are part of our visual analytics, and it takes in 3 key performance indicators. At this point, what we're looking at is average student grade in a course, retention, and then the size of the bubble is the number of students in that class. Again, we're actually working with our assessment committee because we have new data that we can say, okay, pick key performance indicators you think may show student success, and we'll run some analysis on it. But that big bubble in the upper right-hand corner that has high retention, high student grades, and high enrollments, that's our microbiology class. Because even if you were an undergraduate and you have a bachelor's degree and you want to go back to nursing school, you probably didn't take microbiology. And so those students are all hardworking, dedicated, have a goal in mind, and there's probably a reason that course is up in that upper right-hand quadrant. We worry sometimes about courses in the upper right-hand quadrant because it may be great inflation. It may just be an easy professor and the students really are just getting by easily. So we have put those on the assessment cycle. And those in there in that bottom left-hand corner are now courses we want to go in. And so instead of having a set assessment cycle where we were assessing courses, spending a lot of time on courses that were actually performing really well, we now can very quickly focus in and see where we need to spend the time. On Project Aristotle, we used the same faculty members, same goals and objectives, same course, but embedded the content. One was in the spring, one was in the fall. This is a student engagement web matrices. And what it was able to do is show a student engagement versus in the digitally embedded content versus a textbook. And I'll blow this up a little bit. The darker the line and the closer to the center, the more engaged the students are. Those that are out on the periphery tell our faculty member, you know what, you probably need to try to engage these students because they're not engaging with you and they're not engaging with each other. The one in the center that has Sarver on it, I'm not sure if I can shoot a laser over there. That is my teenage daughter who actually took this class. So not only do I have great spider graphs, I have teenagers, this was good, but this wasn't so good. So something to be said for teenage daughter analytics.
Well, it's a good thing she did well in that class.
It's a good thing, exactly. This is the other that's really cool for us is to be able to go in and look at what the students are spending their time doing. And we can take it down to the learning asset. I mean, it's broken up into pretty big chunks of threaded content and unit content. we can actually drill down to the unit, to the actual learning asset. So what that does for us that's really, really cool is that we can now go back to a faculty member in math. We talked earlier, everybody picks on math. Algebra 2 and say, you know, students aren't learning differential equations. Why aren't they learning differential equations? Well, we can look and say, you know what, this asset isn't working. You, as the faculty member, the content expert, go fix your class. That is the ultimate in academic freedom. Go fix your class. You're the expert. We're not telling you which learning asset to use. We're telling you you need a different one because this one doesn't work. So if you think about the concept now, academic freedom now has an accountability component to it, which is kind of what we've been searching for a while. Because if you ask a professor, you know what, they're not learning. Well, you know what, the admissions department's been recruiting really sucky students. Or, you know, your classroom assessment isn't very good. Well, the students don't like me. My goal isn't to make them like me. My goal is for me to stand up there and teach. We can now actually tie back to that faculty member and say, but they're not learning, therefore fix it. This is, again, one of those, honest to goodness, I pulled this out of an assessment report, not that we did. Can you imagine being a board member and getting that? We, as the people who are ultimately accountable for the quality of this institution, how are we doing in math? Our F is good. I don't know, you don't know. We are starting to give our board stuff like this, just a big summation of all of those other little things amalgamated. 3 bubbles, our board can get 3 bubbles. Did they move up? Did they move down? And so from here, our board can start saying, okay, why did the blue bubble go down? We can drill down that and get to the bubbles that say, well, it was actually in the math department. Drill down into more information and start to hold the accountability down the lines. And now you can guarantee the board will say, next time we give them a report, where's our bubble? So that's kind of how some practical applications that we're using.
So that sort of speaks, Mark, to being able to define what learning is. I actually I wonder if part of what holds us back is that we don't have a very good definition of what quality is. So when we work with universities and that we want them to change, we want them to do something differently, they say, well, we don't want to hurt quality, but I can't get a very good definition of what that is. So I'm wondering, as you're doing analytics, it seems to me that one of the obstacles is what are you optimizing for? What are you measuring, and how do you use that to talk about performance? I don't know if folks could talk a little bit about what kinds of data do you use and what kind of measures do you use to know if things are working?
I think we have to look at it in terms of phases. You know, what analytics means now that we are starting on it, and what it means eventually and where we want to take it. And I think where we want to take it is, you know, use analytics not in a, you know, and Mike, you were talking about this earlier when we were talking, that it's not in the sort of commerce-y transaction way that, you know, how many people click on a buy button, right? Mm-hmm. And what else can we feed them? But this is behavioral, which is another kind of analytics, which is, which I equate more to like how analytics is being used in fitness and health industry, rather than sort of commerce or e-commerce industry. And I think the eventual aim is that, you know, we have to figure out through this analytics how students learn better, right? So I think that's one objective in my mind. And the other objective is eventually that, you know, how students learn to learn, right? So that learning becomes a lifelong process for them, and effective learning becomes, and that's what we have to sort of strive for, in my opinion, through analytics, right? And I think, you know, in phase 1 of it is just, you know, how do things like engagement improve your grades, mm-hmm. right? Because you're not going to break away the system and, you know, put in a new system right away. It has to sort of phase in my opinion.
For me, I mean, I've got a framework I use because I'm always trying to respond to this, to people that just hear the hype, you know, a provost or someone that says, what are we doing with analytics? I said, there's really 3 ways. I draw a picture of an XYZ axis. I say there's 3 orthogonal dimensions that are your outputs, your outcomes. So one is persistence measures, right? What I did, my project, attendance. Did you attend next week? Did you attend your first 3 classes? Did you graduate in 5 years? All of those are persistence measures. That's kind of where we are now, where we have been. You look at IPED's data, it's all based on that. Why? Because it's easy to measure, which is okay. It doesn't tell the whole story. Someone could get through 4 years of college and not know what they were supposed to know, but it's a good start.
And I think go ahead, sorry, I'll let you finish.
Another dimension is engagement. Customer satisfaction, how much were they
Right.
engaged, involved, which is a great one. What was their experience like? The third one we've hit on today many times, I think Jim was just talking about this in the last session, is the learning. Did they learn what they were supposed to learn? That, I would argue, is the most important thing to measure, yet the hardest thing to measure. So, what Common Core Standards is doing in K-12, if that gets its way through between what Western Governors is doing and the other institutions, Southern New Hampshire doing competency-based education, if you can get more standards around what does it to mean that someone took a marketing course. It's done on the math side. If you go to Carnegie Learning or ALEX, they can say intermediate algebra class is broken down into 92 core topics, order of operations, adding mixed fractions, and they could tell you yes or no whether you've got each of those. Quantitative disciplines, you can do that. Non-quant, you can. So looking at those 3 about persistence, engagement, and learning are kind of how I frame the outcomes.
But, as learners in life, we all know how we learn best. But we get into a classroom and we are forced to learn the way the faculty member thinks that we should learn. And so what we're trying to do is build our courses with different paths and then use the analytics to say, it looks like in your first 7 days of class, looks like you are a visual learner based on what you're using out of the system. Those students who are visual learners who got an A in this class in the past took this path. Would you like to follow this path? How cool is that? I mean, I was in West Virginia a couple of weekends ago, probably the only place you can find a camouflage bow tie. And I decided, you know what? I need
Only
a
during
camouflage.
hunting season.
I know.
Yeah.
Have to wear the blaze orange one.
Yeah.
I need a camo bow tie. So I bought it, and then I realized I have no idea on God's green earth how to tie a bow tie. So a friend of mine would have gone out, found some instructions on the internet with, step-by-step pictures. I know I'm a visual learner, so I go out to YouTube and start, how do you tie a bow tie? Search for and I self-assessed. This guy really didn't teach me how to tie a bow tie because it still doesn't work. And go to the next one, which one looks like. There's also voting. There were 3 million people that watched how this person tied the bow tie. It must be working. So, those are analytics we use in life, and we can then put those in our courses to make our students more successful.
Now, these are all great suggestions that you can give to a faculty member or to a learner. Yeah. Are people taking the suggestions and taking action? This is where I think we're getting more data, finding good analysis. There's still some room to go in terms of defining measures of success around the actual learning. But are people actually doing anything with the data? And how do you organize an organization or your digital environment so that people do take the information and make different choices?
Yeah. I think I can answer that maybe at a different level than some of the other panelists too. But there's a very strong hunger for data that indicates from our publishers where people are spending time within those books. And they can get some of that data through laboratory settings and studying things like that, but not in a way that provides a high N of data points and things like that. So there's real demand on that, and they will absolutely make that actionable and change the quality of their content based on that kind of thing. From an institutional perspective as well, again, prior to us launching our analytics platform, we had access to the raw data, and we would share that with institutions that had CourseSmart integrations. And one institution in particular, when they saw how the content was actually being used, they very much acted on that data and were able to take it and renegotiate contracts with the publishers so that they were paying more for the books that people were actually using and engaged with, and less for the ones that that were not being used that way. So real effective ways of using the data.
Yeah, I think the important thing here is this sort of matching, making the right data available to the right people.
Yeah.
In the previous session, I think it was Candace Thiel said it great, because I've actually said the exact same thing she said, which is you turn the data into information and then put it in front of someone who can act on it.
Yeah.
So that's the student. So if you look at what was done at Carnegie, at Purdue with John Campbell with the Signals Project, they put a green, yellow, red light in front of the student, and that let the student know what's going on. You can put it in front of the instructor. So at Rio Salado in Phoenix, they use their PACE model, and they put something in front of the instructor to see where it's going. I chose to put it in front of a counselor. If you match that up properly, that's great. I was at eduKan back in November, and I looked at all the major learning management system vendors, and they all had their analytics out there. And some of them were some pretty damn complex bubble charts and multiple pages of charts intended for the instructor. And I'm thinking, I teach once a year for University of Phoenix just to sort of stay fresh. And we do an adjunct model, and if you put complex information in front of someone who either doesn't know how to interpret it or isn't motivated to do as much with it, then you're going to get a disconnect. So it's really matching those two things.
Right. Babur, you mentioned that you started not with the data for the institution, but you're providing data to the student. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of what kind of data you provide to the student?
So our philosophy at NOAA is that we'll build the right product for the student, and then teachers and institutions will follow. And we've been pretty successful with that in our digital textbook arena. And we did the same. We thought a lot about like what is the right analytics product that we want to bring first to market. And we decided the best approach is to show every student what they are doing and how they are engaged with the content. And that's the product that we've just launched. And one of the things that I myself battle with a lot is that I'm a techie guy, so for me graphs and scatter plots and bubble charts, all of this looks very sexy and very cool. But is that informative? Is that actionable to the student? So one of the things that we've done is that we show them the data, we show them the plot about various interactions, but we also give them a summary. We tell them that, look, this is how you studied last week, and if you just bump it up by 20 minutes more, you'll peak. You'll have studied more than you did last week, right? So we're giving them these actionable things. That's the first thing they will see, and then they can actually click on it and, in fact, see the graph. So we're very excited about that. I mean, so we just launched it early this week, so I don't have too much data to share in terms of how students will be using it. But I sort of correlated to like again fitness and stuff, that you have so much data. You stand on a treadmill, you know exactly how many miles, how many, what was your rate of going, how was your heart rate, how much hill you climbed and everything, and somehow that needs to be translated to studying and learning as well, in my opinion, right?
Because
Go ahead, Mark.
we have several luxuries, and that's kind of not fair for those at a traditional institution. One, we're 100% online for our member institutions. The other thing is we have adjunct faculty who are contracted by session. And I've told my chief learning officer, if you have to think about a faculty member for more than 3 days in a row for more than 20 minutes a day, fire them. If the students aren't performing well, we can literally have the best of the best faculty, and we do, from across the world, because we're not geographically constrained. And so some of the issues we're running back into is we tie everything back. So an English Comp 1 class delivered through eduKan is the equivalent to English Comp 1 at our 6 member institutions on campus. We now have far more sophisticated analytics that we're actually having a hard time being able to compare back our data because they simply don't have it. If you go outside of the system, you don't know what the student is doing. What learning resources are they using? How are they engaging? So we're trying to drive more of our traditional faculty to use digitally embedded content, which means the bookstores stop selling textbooks, which really is sacred ground you want to go plow up. They will lose their mind when you start talking about not having textbooks in the bookstore. And so for us, the ability to take a faculty member, all of our faculty members are passionate about teaching and learning and student success, or they wouldn't be there. And so when we take some stuff back to them and say, okay, students aren't engaging in this unit, they take it very seriously, go back in and look and say, okay, do I need to add another resource, or can I change that threaded discussion to engage students more? So we don't use it as a bludgeoning stick, but we do use it as an accountability measure that says, all right, here's a hole, fix it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Talking to universities, they'll often talk about the quality and this open-ended view of quality, and then say, oh, online is lower quality.
Right.
And I actually think we've shown that it actually could be as good quality, if not better.
Right.
What's really interesting is using analytics, you actually have much greater opportunities to continuously improve an either online or digitally enhanced learning experience because of all those data points. Yeah. And in fact, the traditional classroom, all you have is attendance records potentially, and end of course reviews of the professor, which don't really get paid much attention to. So I think it's a much different world than you can envision online growing in terms of its quality and its preferability at a much faster rate than
Some of it goes to institutional policy. I was at a major D1 institution that has some online programs, and they're sort of the ugly stepchildren of the university, and they were asking, okay, I love what you guys are doing with analytics, with assessment. Can you help us with that? I'm like, sure, okay, let's take a look at the class. And she was like, well, that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
What do you mean it's a problem? They're an online class? Yeah, but when our faculty develop the class, the university owns half and they own half, and they won't give us permission to look in their class. Oh, really? Okay, that's an institutional policy that needs to change. I mean, how can you ever measure if the faculty member says, you are not coming into my classroom, even in an online environment?
Yeah. That's right. Now, Jim, you worked in the technology space in the private sector, where I'm sure there was a lot of analytics at eBay, other places.
Right.
What is the same in the education sphere, and what is different? We talked, I think, Barbara, you mentioned earlier, this is not we're not taking items and putting them in the brain cart, which is, so what's the same, what's different between the private sector and, not that the education sector is not the private sector oftentimes. You get it.
I know your point. And just prior to working at CourseSmart, I'd worked at a couple different Silicon Valley companies. So I started at Netscape, and we were acquired by AOL, and then eBay and Jigsaw. And all of those were all digital enterprises that I'd say what's the same across both education and within those primarily e-commerce focused entities is the methods that we used to collect the data. But the outcomes are obviously very different, right? So a company like eBay would be interested in using the data and the analytics to make flows as succinct and useful as possible so that we can get more listings on the site. They'd use data and analytics to predict if a particular transaction might be fraudulent, right? So those are the kinds of things that they're interested in. But they're still collecting the kind of data that is useful in the domain that we're dealing with now, namely how engaged are the users in the activity that they're doing right there online, how are they using the various products, and what are the outcomes when they do so. But in education, obviously, you're going to use that for much different, for very different purposes.
And we'll go to questions in one moment. I just want to finish. 5 years from now, what are going to be the things that you're going to want to crow about in analytics? What will be the kinds of improvements that analytics are going to be driving down the road?
I think it's quicker than 5 years. I think it's next year. I think it's one of the things that we're working on in using analytics, partnering with Pearson and Newton and some other content folks, we think we may have found a way to save students a significant amount of time in remedial math. Okay, I was expecting a big applause there, so I'm going to say it again. If you look at remedial math, here's what we do. We test you. I get excited, so I have to stand up. We test you, and we say, you know what? You didn't score high enough to be in algebra. Not only did you not score high enough to be in algebra, you're actually not even high enough to be in intermediate algebra, which still actually count as a credit. Doesn't count towards your degree, but you can use it as a credit, an elective. So you're in remedial math 076. Welcome to college. You're stupid. We're going to separate you, is in essence what we tell them. So now the student is there. The reality is we deal with a lot of adult students who may not remember how to handle decimals, may not remember how to divide fractions, but really don't need to go to full remediation on how to add and subtract again. And so using the analytics, we are designing an intermediate class where the student scores not enough to be an intermediate, but not so far down, that they'll come in and take an assessment test inside of that course. That course will then back build exactly what that student needs to remediate and only builds that. Then allows them to go forward into that course, which is now a credit-bearing course, where they would have had to spend a semester not earning a credit, spending the money. We can now get that student in a course where they're earning credit and only remediating the things that they need. So it's going to be a 16-week course. The remediation will happen in the first 4 weeks, so it ends up being one of our traditional 12-week courses. And so they can handle that 4 weeks worth of remediation. And it's all based on the analytics, based on what they know. The course will then self-populate to those things.
Great. Other predictions for the future?
I would still like some applause on that. I thought that was pretty awesome. You guys aren't applauding.
I think it'll truly enable self-paced learning, in my opinion.
Self-paced learning.
Self-paced learning. And I think the idea is each student has their own swim lane, and that can only be enabled in a scalable fashion through analytics.
Yeah. True mastery-based.
True mastery-based.
Absolutely.
Jim.
I think it's pretty simple. I think that if we can reverse the trends in terms of reducing the cost of education and improving the quality, then that's certainly going to be worth crowing about in 5 years.
For me, it's collaboration. I've been part of a group, WCET has a Gates-funded grant to do analytics cross-institution. Last year, Phoenix is one of 6 institutions. This year, we're one of 16 institutions, pooling our data together in a common definitions, common data set. So unlike redefining the credit hour, this is something that we could do without having to have a governmental entity drive it. So I think if that collaboration can happen and we can get to some better definitions, then everyone can sort of benefit from that, from having benchmarks and standards and definitions. So that to me will help.
Great, thanks. Open it up to questions.
My hat, yeah, yes.
This is a polo question, correct?
No.
No.
You're not going to quiz us, are you?
It could be if you have a 10-goal player. No, never mind. Anyway, yeah, I'm Frank. So really interesting conversation. I'd like to go back to something Seth asked. This is a technology conference. Most of the measures that what you're saying is that you can now aggregate, analyze, and in principle project a whole bunch of data. But most of the data points you've talked about, grades, sort of content-based tests, things like that, are the sorts of measures we've had for a while. What do you think this technology might allow you to measure that haven't been the standard kinds of measurements we've been used in education for a long time?
Great.
So I'll take a step here. So going back to that comparison we made to the consumer web side, you get towards those web analytics. So pathing, what someone looked at, what they didn't look at. And kind of reading the tea leaves in there is a lot more difficult. But like you said, with enough data, where you have thousands, tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands of students going into the course online and watching this video and then posting a message about it. And then after that, there's 2 days of nothing happening, and looking for patterns in activity and what they do in the learning management system is one really fruitful place. It's a big haystack with a few small needles in it, so I'm not saying it's easy. But that's kind of where you're gleaning that next level. But I don't want to underscore what you said. A lot of the data that is useful today is stuff we've had for years and years. So there's not a lot of magic behind it. I don't want to sit here and say, oh, you have to have a big Hadoop cluster to get at data. I think there's plenty you can do with what you have today, but there are new things coming up.
And you can't do it outside of the I mean, the LMS captures a lot of this. And so if you have traditional NC faculty who only use the LMS to post their syllabus, you're really not capturing a lot of rich data, where if they had the student engage more with the assets in that learning management system, you could get richer data.
For guys from the publishing end of this, it seems to me that you've actually got access to different kinds of data, particularly around engagement.
I was going to mention that, I mean, we are measuring something which is different, which hasn't been done before, or at least not to this extent. That it's engagement foremost, and like I mentioned, I think that's a leading indicator of how a student will perform in the class, or how they're grasping the content. And one of the things that was, we've just released our product. We've been doing this analysis on engagement for a while now, and what we've learned is that, we looked at what percentage of the content was being read by students who got A grades and who got C grades. And that was only different by about 20 percentage points. But where there was a marked difference was that A students were engaging in different ways as well, not just reading and flipping the pages, but also highlighting a lot more, by about 50 percentage points more than C students. In fact, flashcards that we have in our application, that was being used double by A students versus C students. So these are the kind of things that you can now correlate to how students are grasping content, which I don't think was.
So it's a more active engagement, so getting underneath just time on task.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that what becomes really interesting is, so number one, I think you can measure that engagement in a way that you couldn't have done before. And then you can start to correlate those data points with other things like, what was your grade in the class? So your outcome, matriculation, things like that. And then it becomes really interesting, I think. So.
Interesting. Another question over here?
Question over here.
So when you start getting into non-standard analytics, specifically pathing and how that relates to personalized user information such as grades, how do you start handling privacy concerns? I mean, nowadays we have a huge issue where people don't want you to know everything that they click, but pathing is exactly that when you start comparing it to things like grades and personalizing it. How do you get past that problem and still make it a beneficial technology?
Great, so privacy concerns?
I mean, privacy is certainly there. One of the reasons why we actually, in fact, put our analytics platform for each student for themselves is because we don't want to even expose it to teachers at this point or institutions at this point. I think the best use is for the student to understand how they learn. And if we can make that useful to them, I think they'll want to share it more with teachers. But in the end, you have to ask. And if the student agrees to it, then you collect and give this information back to them.
I know as an institution, sort of following the same rules as FERPA.
Right.
If it's data for an academic purpose, then we use it. And this is all about what's happening in the classroom. We're not trying to upsell them on software or different deals. This is all about performance in the classroom. So I know we don't have any issue because it's really fitting in that same bubble as FERPA.
And what's interesting, just
go ahead.
because we're sort of in between, right? We're an online e-commerce site, and we also work with institutions. So on the one hand, we are trustee certified, and that's an online certification that has a number of obligations in terms of how you handle user data and how you can share that. So we take that very seriously. We work with trustee to make sure that we're following their guidelines. And then on the institutional side, we're governed by FERPA just like they are. So, so all those things are important. And then, of course, we always provide the opportunity that a student can opt out if they choose to.
Mike, you actually, in a prior discussion we had an interesting point, not exactly around privacy, but around, you called it the ethics of knowing. Do you want to share that?
I'm not the creator of that. That's other people have mentioned that. But so if, us as an open institution, a lot of our focus now has been on the upfront side, and when the diagnostic, students coming in the front door. Well, if we have data and pathing saying that, Austin P does this pathing, so here's the optimal path for you to graduation. Well, if we look at information about them and find out that any path from them will lead to failure and not getting a degree, do we have the obligation to say something or not let them in or do something different? We haven't gotten there. We're not at that point yet, but that's a natural extension of where you go with this. And I don't have an answer to it, but it's something to be very cautious of. If you know that there is no good outcome here, do you have the obligation to do something about it and tell that student?
I think another question over here.
My name is Michael Bettersworth with Texas State Technical College. Great information on providing data to different audiences. It's amazing when you provide faculty or students or anybody with new information, they'll tend to behave differently if they're more informed about a path that will lead to a better outcome. What are you doing in terms of outcomes after graduation? And I mean that both in terms of, and where can we go in terms of that, and both in terms of outcomes and earnings and placement, but also at the competency level. If we place someone with an employer, giving feedback to a faculty member about individual competencies. We certified that this person is a really good team player. Are they? Things like that at the competency learning level as well as the outcomes measurements of performance. Thank you.
It would be an awesome system. I think institutions, that are being held accountable even for, are the students that you educated even working in the field 2 years later, institutions can't seem to get that data or struggle getting that data. It would be, wow, how awesome would it be to tie it in and then have them say, this is what I didn't learn and had to learn while I was on the job, and we could then integrate that into the curriculum. Maybe we can make money doing that. We'll talk later.
I was going to say, that's the problem with conferences like these, because you spend your working day trying to solve these, what you think are big problems, and then you come to a conference and someone points out that you're really just solving a small part of the problem and there's much more to do. Thanks for depressing.
So someone has to develop. Well, Mark,
now that we feel bad, thank you.
Mark, you said that the LMS has to capture the data. Someone has to capture the LMS that's the lifetime LMS.
Right.
Capture
Called Facebook.
Facebook. Actually, I'm sure there's someone around these halls that could cook up something that would take social media and do something with it. So, another question over here.
John Idelson, CSU Monterey Bay. I've been active with PES, which is the Post-Secondary Education Council, and IMS. And what do you think is the chance of coming up with interoperability standards around data? There's been a challenge really to get, you all have your interesting data. It'd be interesting how much that could be aggregated across your companies and across the various institutions.
That's one thing that the PAR framework, the WCET project that I'm part of, it's one of the things, one of the outcomes is they say, benchmark clearinghouse, that gets thrown around, and that's tough because, who's to anoint the one person to kind of put it out? I mean, what Rob has done at IMS, I mean, that's a great spot, and I would love to collaborate there. But that's exactly the path we're going down. And the work we're doing, it's been getting a lot of press in the last 6 months since we started the second phase. We included Western governors to give ourselves a challenge on how to measure data on in the first round, Phoenix was the non-standard of the 6 institutions. In the second round, we brought on Western governors so I can pass the crown on to them. So we're trying to. I think it's going to take an entity proving it out like that to get us to that next level. But I've got some faith it'll get there.
And I think it may be a place where those big publishing houses could really help here. I know we partnered with Pearson for the content. We use Pearson's learning management system, which in essence means I have sold my soul to Pearson. But what it gives us is some really great data, because if other people are using this textbook, we can then compare our results to whether those learning assets are actually working. And they did a huge study of about 400,000 students across all the institutions in their system. And I'll just get the numbers wrong, but 87% of people make up statistics anyway. With about 78% accuracy within the first 7 days of a class, they have predictive analytics to know if that student is going to pass that class, and about a 68% accuracy of what their final grade will be. That's using data across multiple institutions, not just us. I mean, that's that's pretty amazing. And so as institutions come together, and I mean, really the publishing houses who have those digital assets really could do a lot to help out with the institutions.
And one thing that we found helpful at CourseSmart is we're representing all of our data using Arabic numerals. So that's one thing.
Well, with that, I can tell you with 100% certainty and probability that if I don't wrap it up, I will get stormed by our organizers. So thank you to the panel. A lot of interesting things going on, and probably a lot more to come. So thank you for the great questions.